Hello everyone. So I'm very happy to see you all in this joint seminar. Thank you for joining us for the fifth series of Future Earth Coast Sustainability Initiative for Marginal Seas of East and Southeast Asia Youth Joint Seminar. So today we're gonna have Dr. Kevin Muhammad Lukman, who will deliver a talk about the potential of seagrass associated tourism. And I will give you a brief introduction of his curriculum vitae. So Dr. Lukman has a PhD from Tauku University, specializing in social environment studies. His research fields and interests involve coastal ecosystems and sustainable tourism development. And he has been actively working together with researchers from many field studies, for example, BRIN in Indonesia and Research Institute for Humanity and Nature from Japan. Kevin is now leading sustainable tourism study center in his university where he worked today, and he has transdisciplinary research and environmental conservation expertise. So I think this seminar will be very interesting. And we will have 30 minutes presentations from Dr. Kevin. Then we will have 15 minutes of Q&A session. And the last is closing remark. So without further ado, please, Dr. Kevin, deliver your speech. Time is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rifai, for your great introduction. And good morning, everyone. I am honored here to be invited by the Future Earth Coast and SIMSEA as the speaker for the Youth Joint Seminar. And today, I would love to share with you some of my results from our international research collaboration, especially to promote coastal ecosystem conservation. And for today's seminar, the topic is about the seagrass associated tourism. Maybe some of you not familiar with this terminology. So today, let me share with you what is the seagrass associated tourism and how this kind of concept can help to promote the coastal ecosystem conservation. So first of all, let me start with something interesting and a little bit interactive to all of you. So anyone here have ever tried diving or snorkeling before? If so, please raise your hand in the Zoom. And if so, I would love also to ask you in the chat box, what kind of objects that you usually see or try to look at during diving or snorkeling? You can type it in the chat box. Maybe you are looking at something in particular. Great. We've got several raising hands here. And let me see at the chat box as well. Okay, Marika says that you look at the coral. Great. Yeah, coral is very beautiful. Yeah. And also, Tin, yeah. Oh, snakes. Yeah, be careful about that. Yeah, that's a poisonous one. And also fish. Yeah, there are so many beautiful fish usually you can see during diving and snorkeling. And yeah, I think those are the prominent objects that people usually look at if they are doing diving or snorkeling. Coral reefs, fish, or maybe in some particular destination, you want to look at maybe specific species like the turtles or maybe the dugong, for example. But one thing that I noticed here is that not many of you trying to look at the seagrass itself. Yeah, that's the transition, yeah, the bridging to this today's topic. So what is seagrass actually? So seagrass, for everyone here, it's a key ecosystem, especially in the coastal, because seagrass has multiple benefits especially for coastal communities. You can see here in the right figure from Ramachandran et al. 2019 that looking at the ecosystem services provided by the seagrass, it provided a lot of benefits from the provisioning aspect, cultural aspects, regulating aspects, supporting aspects, so many benefits. Seagrass can actually provide a carbon sequestration capacity in the coastal ecosystem. And not only that, seagrass can also provide coastal protection for disaster mitigation because it can break the waves. So when it arrives at the coastal, it doesn't have that much strength as if there is no seagrass, for example. And of course, for the water quality, if seagrass is present, then the water quality usually is slightly higher compared with the area that doesn't have seagrass on it. And if we look at the habitat of the fish as well, some of you mentioned that you want to look at fish during diving and snorkeling. Oh, and if that's so, then you also need seagrass because seagrass is a habitat for those fishes. Because in a certain duration during the life cycle of fish, they usually live around seagrass. So seagrass plays an important role here. And not only for fish, some of the we call it charismatic species in the ocean. They also sometimes lurking and feeding around the seagrass habitat. For example, dugong, and of course, a turtle, and also the seahorses. So if you want to look at those magnificent creatures, then you also need seagrass to be present in the ocean. And last but not least, which will be the topic for today, in cultural services, seagrass can also play an important role for providing activities such as fishing and also swimming, because some of the seagrass species, it looks really, really beautiful if you take a look. So I recommend to all of you, if you go diving or snorkeling again later in the future, try to look whether there is a seagrass or not in that area. But now let's take a look at the case of Indonesia itself. So as we know, seagrass ecosystem among mangrove is one of the blue carbon ecosystem. And in Indonesia, those two ecosystems, mangroves and seagrass in particular, have their own challenges. You can see Indonesia is a quite a rich country in terms of the distribution of mangrove and seagrass. You can see at the blue carbon map in the left figure, the green line shows the distribution of mangroves. And almost from the west part of Indonesia to the eastern part of Indonesia, you can see mangroves all around in the many coastal areas. And the same with seagrass, although in seagrass, it's more prominent in the eastern part of Indonesia, but there's also some in the western parts, for example, in the Bintan Island, which also will be a very, very important ecosystem as well in those areas. And however, despite this huge distribution of those key blue carbon ecosystems, you can see at the right figure below that for mangrove and seagrass, although their number is quite prominent, unfortunately for seagrass, the number of seagrass that is inside the conservation area is only 40%. Meanwhile, seagrass that are outside conservation area is the majority, which almost around 60%. And it's almost around 178,000 hectares of seagrass distribution that are now still outside conservation area, according to the data from the Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries 2023. So what will happen to the seagrass that are outside conservation area? It is actually something very concerning for all of us. Why? Because according to the research from Unsworth et al. 2018, seagrass in Indonesia are in a critical state of decline. Why? So many factors. One of them is because of the coastal development. So many infrastructure development and also many human activities that contribute to the decline of seagrass. And the decline of seagrass will ultimately also influence the resilience to climate change and the loss of ecosystem service values. You can see in this map provided by Unsworth et al. 2018, similar with the previous map that we've seen for the distribution of seagrass. Unfortunately, those existing seagrass ecosystem in Indonesia are now facing challenges and threats which contribute to their decline. For example, you can see in Mentawai, there is an extensive loss and or degradation. Why? Because of the coral mining, for example. And in the Bintan, for example, it's not as much as loss compared with Mentawai, but there's also some concern there. Why? Because of the oil pollution. Because so many boats, especially the huge one, that across the island, and they also contribute to the oil pollution and waste as well. And not only that, in, for example, close to the Indonesia capital, Jakarta, there are so many small islands. For example, Pari Islands, they are also having an extensive loss and degradation there due to the coastal development and land reclamation. And the same you can see as well and observe in the other main island in Indonesia, for example, in Kalimantan Island, in the Bontang city, for example, because of the degradation of water quality, as well as in Sulawesi Island as well, because of the coastal development, and many other parts of the country. So the question now is, how can we protect the seagrass ecosystem? And especially, we don't want only to protect, but we also want to promote their benefits. So their benefits can be felt by the coastal communities. One of the concepts that we are trying to promote and introduce is the seagrass associated tourism concept. We've published this study in 2023. So basically, we introduced this concept as an alternative approach to protect seagrass by promoting the conservation and also introduce tourism as an alternative livelihoods for the coastal communities. So previously in the ecosystem services, we can see so many benefits of seagrass ecosystem services. And one of them is for the cultural aspects in the recreation and as a destination for tourism. And we can see that seagrass can be promoted to be a prominent area for tourism destination. And if we can develop a destination that oriented towards seagrass as a recreation and as a nature-based destination, then hopefully it can also influence the increase of the livelihood for the coastal communities. And the increase of the livelihood will also influence to a higher coastal communities resilience. In the previous studies in 2023, we have mapped the number of destinations in Indonesia that have this kind of similar concept. They're not really particularly mentioning as a seagrass associated tourism, but they are link their activities of tourism to the existence of seagrass. For example, activities related to fishing, snorkeling, dugong observation, coastal sightseeing, and also education and diving. Those can be integrated with the existence of seagrass ecosystem, and then we can also promote their conservation. However, a follow-up question arises. Is this kind of concept is feasible so we can implement the seagrass associated tourism in the area around Indonesia? That is something that become our main question and become our main research question that I would like to share with all of you today. So questions, for example, like what are the perception of the local communities about the existence of seagrass and how they perceive the ecosystem services that they provide? That is the first question, because we need to know how the local communities perceive the existence. Is it as something disturbing or is it maybe as something beneficial? We need to identify that first. And also we need to identify the second question about the threats that the local communities perceive. Do they believe that the seagrass is in the current state of decline? And if so, what are the factors that contribute to the threats that seagrass felt right now? And also to the third question is about the challenges of the implementation. Because again, this is still a concept. A seagrass associated tourism is not yet implemented. And if we want to implement this kind of concept, we need to know from the locals' perception as well, what are the main challenges that can hinder this type of concept to be implemented. So in this study, we are conducting a questionnaire survey research in the Bintan Island Regency that you also see in the previous slides that Bintan is now facing quite a decline in their seagrass ecosystem. And actually in this island, there is also a huge number of seagrass distribution as well in many of their coastal villages, such as Pengudang, Brakit, Malang Rapat, and Teluk Bakau. And we are doing this research by conducting household surveys and also semi-structured questionnaire, and also complemented with some focus group discussion with multiple stakeholders. And what are the results of this research? It is actually quite interesting because from the local community's perception, we found out that they do actually aware about seagrass ecosystem services quite moderately, but only for certain species, certain services, which is, for example, supporting services. You can see, for example, the fish nurseries, around 20% of the respondents, they say that they actually extremely aware of the services or benefits provided by seagrass. And around 30% also very aware or moderately aware of this kind of services. And not only supporting services, but there are also other services that people are aware about. For example, seagrass providing foods for the coastal communities. That's also quite high. You can see in the foods provisioning services, around 10% are very extremely aware, and 30% moderately aware, and 20% were also very aware of this kind of benefits. So that's a good news. At least people now understand or aware of this kind of benefits. Unfortunately, there were other services that people are still not yet understand about. So for example, in the regulating services, you can see the benefits of seagrass for water purification, benefits of seagrass for coastal protection, for trapping sediment, and also seagrass as blue carbon ecosystem that can sequester carbon. So many of the local people were not yet aware of this kind of benefits. Around 60 to 75% of local communities were not yet aware for this kind of benefits. So that's another concerning thing. Because if they don't aware that such benefits exist, then they probably don't understand the real value of the seagrass ecosystem in their area. So that's another thing that we need to look around. So we do some kind of basic correlation analysis because we have the data of the demography and the socioeconomic. And then we did a correlation with their awareness and the perception of seagrass ecosystem services. And we found out three main insights from this analysis. The first one is that so many groups. So we basically divided the local communities into 9 groups. For example, the civil servant, the fisherman, the housewife, the entrepreneur. And from those groups, we found out 3 key groups that have high awareness of the ecosystem services. The first one is the civil servants. So it's very interesting that civil servants, so people who work in the government agencies, for example, they do have high awareness for the benefits of seagrass. So for example, you can see in the table that civil servant has quite a high correlation with the benefits of seagrass for water purification, for coastal protection, for trapping sediment, and more importantly, for carbon sequestration. Even though we've seen before that usually not so many people understand about the carbon sequestration benefits from seagrass, but here in civil servants, we found out a quite high correlation of their awareness to carbon sequestration. So that's the first one. Very interesting results. The second one is from the entrepreneurs. So people who have small businesses, maybe like a small restaurants, small shops, they also have quite a high correlation, as you can see, in the water purification, coastal protection, and not as high as the civil servants, but they do also have quite a strong correlation for carbon sequestration. And the last one is the tourism sector group. The third group here, you can see they also have quite a high correlation with so many ecosystem services of seagrass. So what are the main findings of this correlation analysis that we found out in this study? So these 3 important stakeholders, the civil servants, the entrepreneurs, and the tourism sector, we need to engage them if we want to develop seagrass-associated tourism. Why? Because they have a basic high understanding of the seagrass benefits. So if we can involve them, if we can engage them, hopefully they can spread this awareness to the other local communities as well. So the Bintan local communities will have a higher awareness, and hopefully by having a higher awareness, that can be translated into a real action to protect seagrass and also to utilize the benefits of the seagrass ecosystem in their area. However, we'd also take a look at the threats that the local communities perceive in the seagrass ecosystem services in Bintan. And we found out so many threats were being mentioned by the local communities. However, there were 3 main threats that mentioned quite a lot by so many respondents. The first one is the threats from the boatways. Again, this is a results that complement the study from Unsworth et al. 2018, where they mentioned that both ways become influentially negative to the seagrass ecosystem health. And this is also the same. Why? Because in Bintan, because it's very close to Singapore, so many huge boats passing across the island. And those boats also carried an oil waste that sometimes maybe got leakage to the environment. And those leakage influence the seagrass ecosystem health. That's the first threat. And also the second threat is because of the coastal development, the construction of port, and also the last time I visited there were an industrial sector development in the coastal areas that can also threaten the seagrass existence, and also the issue of plastic waste as well. Sometimes it's not about the waste generated from the island, but because of the plastic waste that are being carried by the current from other countries. And if those plastics being carried into the coastal areas where seagrass ecosystem is present, then the ecosystem health can also be declining. So those are the three main threats that we've identified in the study. And the last one is about the seagrass associated tourism concept itself. So we ask whether it is feasible or not, and whether if it's feasible, what kind of activities that the local communities want to do in the area around seagrass. And you can see in this section A, so many activities and also the interesting one as well, or being mentioned by the local communities. For example, mollusk cleaning, that can be a fun activity to be done in seagrass area. Also swimming as well, recreational fishing. Indonesians do love fishing, for you know. And also observing organism, because again, Bintan is quite famous for their dugong population. So being able to observe those kind of organism is also quite a fun experience for the locals and also for the tourists as well. And so many other activities as well that can be expanded and developed for the seagrass associated tourism. And if we are looking at the marine organisms itself, there are also many species that we can observe that usually present nearby seagrass. For example, again, fish, shells, and also sometimes a few dugongs and sea turtles as well. Take a look at them, observe at them, and that can also be quite an interesting experience for tourism activities. However, to be able to do that, the local communities mentioned there are some activities that need to be done to develop seagrass associated tourism. You can see in the section C, for example, maintaining cleanliness is one of the key components to ensure that the ecosystem is still pristine and is attractive enough for tourists to visit the destination area. And also to have a proper tourism management. This is also a very important one because again, the management will influence so many things from the employees and also from the quality of the destination as well and the satisfaction of the tourists visiting the area. So we really need to have a proper management here. And having a proper facilities is also very important to ensure that in tourism, they have enough basic service facilities to support the tourism sector. However, we also need to consider another things. This is actually the slide from my presentation in the ChikyuKeng, the Research Institute of Humanity and Nature, that the increase of tourism sector is, we call it a double-edged sword. It has positive and also sometimes it has the negative aspects of it. And if, for example, the seagrass associated tourism can be implemented successfully, and then that will influence a huge number of tourists, for example, coming to Bintan Island, then the issue of sustainability will arise. One of the issue is about the natural resources. For example, the use of water. You can see here from the study of Becken 2014, tourism sector in Indonesia can use 4 to 5 times higher compared with the locals use. So you can see here the number of water use per person per day for tourists almost reach 800 liters per person per day compared to the locals use, which only around 200 liters per person per day. So that almost 4 times higher. And if the number of tourists visiting increasing more and more, and then that will be the issue of the natural resource in that area, especially because Bintan is a small island. And small island has very, very limited number of groundwaters. And also that is very vulnerable if so many groundwater extraction happen to support the development of tourism sector. If, for example, we can mimic the example of Japan, that where the tourism water use is quite similar with the locals' water use, maybe we can not uh, put a pressure enough to the environment. We can minimize the pressure and ensure that sustainable development and sustainable tourism can be implemented in the area. So this brings to the last slide for my presentation today. So as a take-home message, we want to introduce you with this resilience framework for all of us here. So, okay, we have introduced this a potential alternative concept, which is the Seagrass associated tourism. But this concept is not a silver bullet. It is not a solution for all of the problems. No, 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 it's not. We need to take a look at several things to ensure this concept can be implemented properly and can tackle the issues around the seagrass ecosystem effectively as well. For example, about the funding. Again, we introduced this concept because we want to get sustainable funding. The conservation of seagrass requires a lot of funding. And to be able to support those kind of activities, the tourism sector hopefully can help that. So we need to understand those kind of relationship. How the tourism sector can help to support the sustainable funding of seagrass conservation. And if we do that, then the next component that we need to understand is how those activities can help to protect the seagrass ecosystem itself, because that is the main goals. That's why we introduced this concept. We really want to protect seagrass and to ensure how their ecosystem services can be maximized. And then we also need to look at the sustainable tourism practices, because again, if we want to have a sustainable development in the future, we really need to minimize the human impact, because no matter what you said about tourism, it will give a negative impact to the environment. And how we can minimize that impact is very important to ensure the ecosystem health of seagrass. And the last one is about the engagement of the local communities and capacity building. We really need to involve local communities to help in this kind of concept implementation. And we also need to increase their capacity so they have the independence, so they have the initiative to be able to protect seagrass by themselves. And last but not least, we also want to mention that unfortunately, this concept has a weakness that it cannot stand alone. So we cannot just mention, okay, we're gonna have seagrass as the main actor. You can. Seagrass, unfortunately, here, if we give analogy of a movie, is like a supporting actor. So we really need another main actor, which I think all of you mentioned in today's seminar. When I ask what kind of objects that you would like to see, you mentioned corals, you mentioned fish. Those are the main actors. And seagrass here can provide as the supporting actor to help the sustainable coastal development. So that will be all for my presentation today. I hope all of you can get some benefits and maybe a new knowledge for this. And if you would like to know more about this kind of study, you can take a look at our latest publication with the title Understanding Stakeholders' Perception on Developing Seagrass Associated Tourism, which was published in Marine Pollution Bulletin. And I would like to also say special thanks to the Badan Riset BRIN Indonesia, as also Dr. Rifai here to support this kind of research and publication. And that will be all for today. Thank you very much. And I'll give back to the moderator. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Dr. Kevin. Your presentation is very interesting and, provide us so many insights to really care about seagrasses because, yeah, as you mentioned that seagrasses is like unsung heroes. So it is not really, respected, but actually they are very important to support the other communities in coastal and sea areas. Yeah, I think we will have about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A sessions. So I hope that there will be many questions to Dr. Kevin to really, provide new insights, new knowledge to support the conservation of seagrass ecosystems. Yeah, please, if you have questions, just raise your hand and maybe you can ask through the chat or directly. Yeah, please. Yeah, Moriaka Sensei, please.
Yes. So while waiting for the other comments and questions,
Yeah.
so I wanna take first. Actually, I'm very interested, very inspired by your talks about seagrass tourisms, and particularly, especially the first part of the talk, especially like spatial distributions of the blue carbons especially in the Indonesian regions. I think west part of the Indonesia's coast is more like mangroves, origin, right? And the east part is more seagrass. So what causes these clear differences, this distribution, this blue carbons map in the western east? Is it related to like shallow water or deep waters or some like orography, etc.?
Okay, thank you, Morika Sensei. That's also a very important question. So, from my understanding, in Indonesia, we call it a Wallace line, which divide the western part and the eastern part. And according to the geography and the history, so basically those islands previously were divided into like million years ago. It was divided into two different parts, and I think that also influenced the ecosystems and the environment, and why maybe, for example, in the western parts the main ecosystem were dominated by mangroves, and also why in the eastern parts it was dominated by seagrass, for example. And actually it's not only the blue carbon ecosystem, but the species as well is very, very different. So the animals in the western part of Indonesia is particularly very different compared with the eastern part of Indonesia. So, for example, that also maybe again, I'm not really sure, but from my understanding, it was because of the split of the geographical perspective.
I see. So when you
Yeah.
implement the concept of this, like a seagrass tourism, I think better to focus on the eastern part of that Indonesian coast, right? Especially the stakeholders, rather than the west, Indonesia's.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe Mas Hussein, you would like to add more about that.
Yeah. Of course, in the future, we want to have more research on uh, eastern part of Indonesia because, actually, seagrasses, they have like more distribution in eastern part, and also the condition of seagrasses in eastern part is much better than in western part. But because we did so, Kevin and I did the research in Bintan, because Bintan is a popular tourism site in Indonesia. That's why we want to see the correlations between tourism and conservation activities of seagrasses in famous tourism areas. And I think, yeah, of course, it will be a very good idea to have more sites to look at, especially in eastern areas. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like also to add to that. So now Hussein-san is now doing his doctoral degree in
Yeah.
Australia in Deakin University. So hopefully we can get the opportunity to explore the eastern part of Indonesia. And again,
Yeah.
because now Bintan is very, very famous for its tourism destination, very close to Singapore. So many Singaporeans sometimes came in the summer to do some kind of recreational activity. So that's the potential that you don't want to miss. So that's the first one, and the second one is because of so the accessibility. Western part is much more accessible right now. So we also need stronger collaboration network in the eastern part of Indonesia, which we also now doing with the Samratulangi University, for example. So to help us in this kind of maybe doing the field survey and another activities that can help us support to explore the seagrass in the eastern part of Indonesia.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for the clarifications. Okay. So back to the Hussein's. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah. Any other participants who want to raise the question to Dr. Kevin? Yeah, maybe other Chun. Sorry if I cannot spell your name correctly, but
It's fine.
please,
Yeah,
yeah, over to you, Chun. Yeah.
okay. Thank you. Kevin, thank you for the talk. It's really interesting. And actually, my work is also related to seagrass as well. I'm wondering what's the reason there's a huge gap between no matter it's water usage or I guess if you look into the plastic waste they cause for the tourism, it's much higher than the local community. Have you dig into the reason and how, in your mind, how are we going to solve these issues? Thank you.
Thank you. So this is not in the same study site, but again, this is the study that I did with the Research Institute for Humanity and Nature, Chikyukeng with Japan, in the Wangi Island. That's actually in the eastern part, and they also have this kind of stats where tourism has this kind of 4 times higher, and our initial analysis relate that locals have different lifestyle, and those lifestyle really influence with their water use, because maybe the locals not that use much of water, for example, and they are very being efficient and effective with the water that can use. So that's why the number of the waters from the locals are around only 150 liters per person per day, so very few. And if we look at, well, the tourists that are visiting the island, that's very much different. Sometimes maybe they do a shower, and using shower are like a very huge number of water being used, and so many other things that maybe just for example, if I'm visiting Japan, for example, I would love to do ovuro every day because that's very good. I love it. Yeah. But again, that's also a huge number of water being used. So those kind of different lifestyles, especially maybe there is a pattern that usually tourists coming visiting Indonesia, they have this kind of maybe a grandeur lifestyle that sometimes maybe too much excessive for the water use.
Yeah.
Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. But I'm wondering how can we solve these issues? Do you think who should pay this responsibility?
Yeah, I think that's also another future study that we need to conduct, yeah, especially how to reduce this gap. To be honest, I'm not really sure as well how to do that, because again, sometimes tourists when visiting a destination area, they don't want to be restricted. Oh, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. They don't want to do that. They are doing vacation, so they just want to be free to use whatever water they can use. But again, I think nowadays, especially in some hotel, for example, we have these green initiatives. So maybe if you'll take a look at maybe if you visit the hotel, you can see notice like, oh, if you want to reuse your towel, please just put it in the bathroom, for example. So we don't need to change the towels every day, for example. And that really helps, because if you change the towels every day, then that means that you need to wash so many laundries. And then those numbers, if we can reduce it, then hopefully maybe we can also reduce the number of water use, for example. And maybe if we can explore this kind of sustainable initiatives that not that restrictive, but at least we give option for tourists to save the water, then that will really help to conserve the water, for example.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, interesting. Maybe any other questions from the other participants? From Indonesian participants, maybe? Please raise your questions to Dr. Kevin. We have actually 21 participants here.
Yeah, please don't hesitate to ask a question. This is very good opportunity, for us to internet. Okay, so while waiting for other question, I have one small question. So
Yeah.
Kevin, today you didn't discuss so much about natural disaster part, especially like heat waves or even storm surge. So those effects is much smaller than the other like human factors such as like coastal development or some land reclamations. What do you think about the seagrass, right? Degradation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we'll take a look at the study from Unsworth et al., actually, he mentioned that most of the factors that are influencing to the critical decline of seagrass were mostly human activities. But that doesn't mean that natural disasters are not influencing the seagrass. It's actually influencing as well. But again, if we take a look at the human factors, it is much, much more higher. So that's why that's become the main concern that need to be addressed first. Actually, me, Hussein, and also Nadoka Sensei actually published another studies previously that talk about the roles of seagrass in breaking the waves from the ocean. And we actually that we found some models that we can really help to break the waves to by having seagrass in the coastal areas. However, if the waves is too powerful, then that will actually maybe destroy the seagrass presence as well. And that's also the thing that we are also concerned if, for example, because of the climate change, that will also influence the condition in the ocean. And for example, the rising temperature as well, those kind of things that also what we've seen in the coral, for example, maybe in the future that can also influence seagrass, but that's also another future study that we need to conduct.
I see. Okay. So that's why also investigate the link with natural disasters, in the coastal regions. Okay, good.
I would also like to share some of our research in Taiwan, because
Yeah.
although the wave or the climate change will affect seagrass, but according to our research, we found that without the seagrass, the coastal area is actually more easier than to face into the wave and also erosion. So by comparison, if the coastal area has seagrass, then the seagrass actually protect the coastal area and also sustain the sediments and the carbon layer compared to without the seagrass. I'm going to present this research in the ALGS meetings. So if you are attending, stay tuned.
Great.
Oh,
I
nice.
really look for that. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Definitely, definitely. I'm going to see that. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe the other participants, we still have 1 or 2 minutes left. Yeah. If not, maybe we can just go to the final part of this seminar. So based on what Kevin said, that actually seagrasses, they have so many benefits to us, to human, and also not only to human actually, but also to the marine biodiversity and to coastal protections service. And unfortunately, the lack of funding and the lack of awareness globally and also particularly in Indonesia, it really hinder the conservation measures of seagrasses. So one of the alternative to support the conservation initiatives is through the tourism concept. And we hope that after Kevin and his team, get the results of his deep and thorough research, then we can see how the government and all other stakeholders can support this important seagrass, important ecosystem of Indonesian ecosystems. I think we all can support the conservation of these important species, and I think if we work together, I think we can protect these important species. Yeah, I think that's all for me, and I hope that we can see the other seminar in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mas Sen.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
Thank you. Yeah. See
think-
you.